Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have a superstar mixing engineer with me. He's looking bashful now. Joël Dollié. For those of you in the audience who don't know Joel, would you care to take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us what it is you do?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. My name is Joël Dollié. So I'm a mixing engineer who is specialized in orchestral mixing. So I do soundtracks for games, trailer music, of course, and all kinds of orchestral related things. Now, I do a few more things, but usually people contact me for orchestral stuff. So yeah, I do samples and live orchestra, and yeah, all fun stuff.
Now, I've been requested many times to have you on the podcast. So I'm super thrilled to have you because, as we talked before the show, there aren't many engineers who specialize in orchestral and specifically trailer music. Because let's face it, it's a pretty specific niche. And as you said, a lot of composers do the mixing themselves, and then some special people in the audience do their mastering themselves as well. But for me, I'm one of these people, one of these composers who likes to hand the mixing, even the mixing, over to somebody like yourself.
Yeah, I
Now,
think as you said, there aren't too many engineers who specialize in that. And I think it's because it's probably not worth it for most composers because, there is not too many people who really make a lot of money with trial music. I mean, for most people, it's just like a side income. So investing in full mixes when you don't have the certainty that it will be placed is kind of risky, which is understandable. But there is still a place, of course, for trailer mixing, I think, because you have labels who can pay for mixing directly, even though it's kind of rare. And then you have composers who really want to invest in specific tracks, But I think that's the reason why it is what it is.
yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
think it's a special skill. It's kind of like somebody specializing in beat production. The
mm.
way you approach orchestral writing and orchestral mixing is a thing unto itself. Now, my question to you is, how on earth did you get into it?
Yeah, so it's quite an interesting story. Yeah, so I would say I started in 2014 as a composer, because I listened to Steps from Hell and all that kind of stuff when I was a kid, like everybody else. And yeah, after a while, I was like, okay, maybe I should try to do this myself. It looks interesting. I noticed like there is contact libraries and all that stuff. So in 2014, so quite a while ago, I started with that. Then after making a few tracks, I realized that I was more interested in the production aspect, the mixing aspect. So mixing and mastering, because I was just spending like way more time on just mixing my tracks compared to composing. So yeah, that's really kind of when I transitioned in 2016. So a couple years after I started. And then, it kind of started from there. I started mixing tracks for friends. So just my close friends at the beginning. And then it kind of branched out, from friend to friend of friend who to actual clients. And slowly I just kind of stopped composing. Well, I still compose from time to time, but I just kind of transitioned from composing to mixing, like from 2016 to 2018. And then 2018 is when I really started doing mixing full time, like hardcore, like only mixing. And yeah, that's kind of how it went.
So that's awesome. And also it's really nice because it's kind of the exact opposite. Obviously, we both started composing, but my thing was I realized I was spending less and less on the production and more time on just generating the ideas, because that's the thing that I like, just getting the ideas out and then being like, someone else can polish this. So it's
Oh, I
really
see.
interesting. Now, the thing with being a freelancer is it's not talked about enough as to how difficult it is, you know,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how stressful it can be, and how you're not just doing a job, you are doing countless jobs. I mean, what's your experience been of being a freelance mixing engineer?
Yeah. I think I had it easy compared to many people because I had the opportunity to kind of start all of this at my father's house because, I was maybe like 20 or 18 back then when I really kind of started taking this seriously. So I had, that safety net. But I think it's extremely difficult for people who previously had like a job and then they need to kind of transition into this while still, paying the bills and stuff like that. So I can imagine it's way more difficult for them. But for me, it was still quite stressful because, as you said, there are many facets to this job. Like you need to learn about so many things. Like you need to go from zero, like not knowing anything about business, to knowing how to run a business. And even though it's not the most complicated business to manage, you still have to learn about bills, what they don't teach you in school, like business specific bills, it varies from country to country, but there is a lot of like administrative stuff to figure out. And just like plan for the future, you have to be more, you have to plan more for the future because your income will vary a lot. So you can't just plan things as easily. So you have to save more money. You have to account for a lot more things, a lot more details. You have to learn about social skills, communication. I think, well, I mean, I guess you do this in a normal job as well, but you have to learn about quoting, what's your worth. So lots of little things you don't necessarily think of at the beginning that you need to be good at in order to be a successful freelancer. Yeah, I think if you transition from like once like a salary job to this, it can be very difficult because you don't have enough time to do all of this. But for me, it was a little bit easier, as I said, because of that, my situation.
You touched on absolute golden nugget there, which was this question that you do have to confront as a freelancer, which is what is your worth?
Yeah,
And that's a surprising thing because all of a sudden you realize how insecure you are. You go, what is my worth? Oh,
yeah,
nothing. $5. Just give me some money,
yeah. And then you have some people who go the opposite way and they think, oh, I guess they're gonna Google like how much should a freelancer charge? Oh, 600 a day. Okay, sure. Boom, let's try to do 600 a day. And then like you
Yeah.
tell people, okay, I'm gonna make a track for you for 600 a day. Oh, by the way, I don't know how many days I'm gonna take. Is that okay with you? That's
Yeah.
not how it works, So you have to kind of figure out like the middle ground and you know, it
Yeah.
it takes a bit, I think.
I
But then
think that
you hmm.
I think you're right. That it does take a while. It's kind of like I was reading about people starting businesses on Fiverr and all
Hmm.
these tactics they use. For those of you who don't know the audience, Fiverr is like this freelancer website essentially where you pay. The idea is that you pay a fiver for someone to do something. It's very rarely ever a fiver.
Oh yeah.
But people were sort of saying if you want to start it, you go in rock bottom price just to build up a reputation and get money coming in, and then you start raising your prices. And I think that actually that's not that you'd necessarily go rock bottom, but that's quite a good way to think about starting as a freelancer. You go in at entry level, and as you develop your skills and reputation, you then start raising your
Yeah,
prices.
I mean, you're kind of forced to do that. I mean, nobody will hire you if you don't have anything, any credits, nothing, and you ask for the same price as someone with credits. I mean, it doesn't make sense. And even if the quality of your work is good, just the quality of your work is not enough, sadly. So you need like both. You need skills and reputation, and that takes time. Yeah. I
Yeah,
actually
it
use
does.
Fiverr quite a bit, not myself, like, but to hire people to do like web design and stuff like that. So it's definitely more than five. It's more like 100, but you get a lot done for 100. So it's still a good,
Yeah, yeah. Or
but
it is five, and it's if it was
one
web
tweak.
design. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
just like
it. Yeah.
make one button.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And then it's $2,000 for the whole website. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I use Fiverr quite a lot for other musicians. Again, same thing. It's rarely a Fiverr. It's, 50,
Mm,
100, a couple of $100. And actually, it's a fantastic resource for anyone listening, by the way.
yeah.
But yeah, so the other thing, you mentioned it there, that it's not just like soft skills, like being a nice person, or not necessarily being a nice person, but being a nice person with clear boundaries that everyone
Yeah.
understands and respects. It's also you have to do all the accounting, or at least
Yeah.
understand the accounting, and then you have to understand your finances. And then you just touched on this one, which I think is a huge one that no one talks about, is your ability to understand websites. Because you, like myself,
Mm,
not just a mixing engineer.
yeah,
I
true.
mean, you've got a lot of other stuff going on. So let's talk about that other stuff, because I think as a freelancer, it's really important to understand it's good to have other irons in other fires.
Yeah, sure. At least, I mean, in my opinion, I think a freelancer should have at least two things, at least two sources of income that are, they can be connected but somewhat separate because you never know when work dries up. Even big freelancers that I know, pretty famous, they have some months where they have just half the income they would have in another month. For example, usually August is pretty bad compared to February, for example. It depends on the industry, of course, but anyway, so if you have a certain lifestyle and even though you save your money and everything is fine, if you want to kind of not be stressed, I think you should have at least two sources of income. That way, when you have a low month, you have at least the other activity to kind of prop you up a little bit. So yeah. So personally, I have what do I have? So I have a few things. So I do my mixing services, of course. Then I do private lessons. It's very linked because if you can mix stuff for people, you can teach mixing. Well, not necessarily, you need to learn how to explain concepts, but it's possible. So you have this second activity. Then somewhat related as well, I sell courses. So I made a mixing course with the Master of the Score. And back then I had a course that I released myself in 2018. And also I sell an ebook, so also related. It's an ebook on Amazon. It's pretty small, but it's a good entry to orchestral mixing. Then I also make plugins. So that's a new venture because I started in December of 2022. It's not the thing you can just start like that. I had to learn about a lot of stuff to start this. But yeah, it's really interesting so far. I love it. So plugins, and then I think maybe I'm forgetting. No, I guess that's it. I have a few things. I try to diversify my income. So of course it varies a lot. My main income by far is mixing and mastering for clients. And but all this stuff helps as well. So just like mentally, when you have a low month, you're like, okay, that's fine. I'm still gonna sell a few courses and I'm still gonna sell a few plugins, and so you just feel better as a freelancer. Because if you're salaried, it's okay. You're gonna get X amount each month. You don't have to worry about things. You know exactly what you can do. But yeah, as a freelancer, I think you need some kind of side income, even if it's just like on your website a section to do private lessons. There will be a few people who are interested at least. Even with a small online presence, you're gonna have a few people who will be interested at some point. So it's worth doing this, I think.
Dude, I couldn't agree more to have lots of things. I mean, it sounds like you've got a lot on. Essentially, it's mixing, teaching, and plugin development.
Yeah, I guess that's the three main pillars of what I do.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that's take out the plugin development. I mean, that's not too dissimilar from me. It's the writing and it's the teaching. And the teaching, is quite expansive for me at this point in time, which I absolutely love. But it's that same thing. It's got some course sales coming in. It doesn't matter that I didn't land a placement this month. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think it's really fantastic advice. Let's talk about this plugin development thing, because this is, as you said, a new venture for you. What was it that got you into that?
Yeah, it's kind of this idea which I've had for a while because I have a bunch of plugins, of course, as a mixing engineer, and I'm always like, okay, so this plugin does this and this plugin does that, and I have this specific process which I can do only with grouping these two plugins in a chain. And it's kind of annoying. So what if I could just make my ideal plugin with all the features I need to do this? And then, okay, I have another idea. I also do this, but it doesn't sound quite exactly like I want. If only I could tweak this plugin to make it like this, and So it's just like by mixing and by experiencing like different plugins, you kind of start noticing things you like and things you don't like about certain plugins. Then after a while, you realize when you kind of dive in deep inside the mechanics of each plugin, you try to understand why you like what you like. Then you kind of get into the plugin dev mindset, I would say, because you know exactly like what is going on in this plugin. You deconstruct it and you understand why this process sounds good or why it sounds the way it is. Like an example I could take is, okay, so I'm trying to create a really transparent room with nice early reflections that just adds depth, but like in a transparent way. So what is the best way to achieve that? Do you need like whole early reflections? So for people who don't know what early reflections are, it's just like the front end of a reverb, basically. So it's just an example I'm trying to take to illustrate the mindset of plugin development. But okay, so you realize that in order to create a good depth that's fairly neutral and doesn't really destroy the sound, you need relatively short early reflections. So now it's how do I design the best short early reflections, to give me like a depth that I like on many sources and make an actual useful plugin. And that's kind of how I developed my first plugin. I figured out that it's actually quite simple. You just need a few delays and you can really create a nice wide field that's going to be transparent and work on many sources. So it's just by kind of analyzing what certain plugins are doing and figuring out exactly why it's working for you. And I think for me it's kind of like that. I'm not doing like crazy AI plugins, with like super complicated algorithms. The mindset of my company, JD Factory, it's more like creating nice plugins which are, give you like instant results and I just sound good. I'm not trying to create the latest like resonance suppressor, because there is people who with huge resources. Same for reverb. There is people with massive resources who research reverbs in facilities and stuff like that. I think it's not my role to do this. I'm not gonna make the better cinematic rooms. No way. But just find these little things which are not yet in the plugin form and that are just really cool and useful. So lots of the changes that I do in my mixing process are composed of several plugins. So I try to kind of make the ideal workflow and create plugins with that. And I think if I like it, some people will like it as well. That's my thing.
Nice. I think the thing is, like, the way you're talking about it completely explains what makes you excited about what you do. Because I know some people would load a plugin and not think, what is it about this plugin that works and that I like and I use?
Exactly.
Some people just load it up. Sometimes I do that. I load it up and I go, nice, that's it. Job done. I'm not thinking, I
Yeah.
wonder, it's in the same way, you could load up different compressions and say to yourself, like, what is each individual compression doing differently and why and how?
Yeah. I mean, for example, I don't know if some people know this one, I think it's called the ACME Opticom compressor by Plugin Alliance. It's the green compressor. I mean, it's pretty popular. It's like a green opto compressor. Like it sounds really good on drums. So then it's like, why? Well, I noticed that it actually distorts a lot. This thing is like, it's like a crazy distortion and the compressor at the same time. So it really it really kind of rounds off the transients of all your drums, So it makes the drum much fatter because it saturates them a lot. So it's okay, it's a compressor with a relatively kind of slow attack and saturation. So you get more definition in the kick, but you don't get a clicky sound because it's crunching the transient as well. So just this compressor by itself, it's two plugins in one. So then I realized, okay, that's the sound I like. So I like saturation on big drums. Just a little. I like to really over analyze plugins. Sometimes I even put them in Plugin Doctor. It's a plugin that allows you to deconstruct a plugin and find out what each process is doing. So Plugin Doctor, it's called. It's pretty interesting. You load a plugin and you have a bunch of graphs, and you can see like kind of inside the plugin what it's doing. So yeah, basically I'm a nerd, sorry.
I was going to say, we've gone super nerdy, haven't we? We've gone into graphs from plugins.
Okay.
No, but this is great. This is the thing, like, your passion for it clearly comes out. And this is great because we need people like you doing that work, because that's how we get these great plugins that we all know and love. Someone's done something slightly different. They've gone, I like this in a plugin, but can it do this? And that's where, like, for instance, if I was to ever make a plugin, I probably would have tried to do Paul Stretch.
Oh yeah, that's one. It's cool.
Which is, for those of you who don't know,
I have no idea how it works.
I don't know how it does it, but it does it magically. It stretches audio without getting the artifacts. You can stretch like a 5-second sound to become 2 hours long without having any horrible digital artifacts. It's
probably interpolating stuff and just adding content, like copying samples and modifying them slightly and just like inserting samples, I think, in the middle of. And that's the only way. It's not like literally stretching, like we're not missing data. I think it's adding data.
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting. It's really kind of a genius thing for pads and stuff like that.
It is. It's basically just a massive copy paste machine, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it must be. I really don't know how it works, but it has to be adding data. Otherwise, it would just be like, wouldn't sound good.
5 seconds to 2 hours, it'd be like, eh, eh.
Yeah, just like one sample every 20 seconds, just like pop, Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating because actually the way you're talking about plugins is, I think, your brilliant piece of advice for anyone who wants to improve their mixing and mastering skills is to analyze the plugins, to think, okay, that just to put it a bit more simply, like you said, what is it that I like about this and what is it doing?
Yeah.
I often like to bounce MIDI into audio and then bounce that audio through a plugin so I can then see what it's done to the waveform. So you go, oh, it's smushed it like this, and then because for me, I'm a very visual person, so I see the visual element of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So those of you interested, it's JD Factory. Is it .com or?
Yeah, .store. Yeah,
Dot.
JD dots like
Oh, dot store. Okay, cool.
yeah.
I'll put a link in the notes.
Yeah, thank you. That's
jdfactory.store.
good.
I'm going to head over there in a second.
Yeah, for now I just have one plugin. It's called Room Widener, but I'm making another one, so that one will come out soon.
Okay, tell us about Room Widener.
Yeah, Room Widener, that's what I was talking about with the early reflections. So it's a way to kind of add depth to your sound, but it's not just like a reverb, because basically what it does is that it creates opposite reflections compared to the source. So say you have a source panned left, it's going to create reflections on the right. So it's like a depth adder, but also widener by adding like mirrored content. So if you have a sound pan left, it will create the sort of reverb. It's not really a reverb, but it will create the reflections opposite. So you end up with a spread effect as well as the depth effect. So it's kind of two in one. It's great for dry mics, like VSL stuff, for example, even though I don't necessarily recommend making trailer music with VSL stuff. But it's going to add depth to your dry recordings, or even like wetter sources, for example, CS. But like libraries which are not super wet, I don't know if you really need it on Spitfire stuff, but for CS, CSB, Cinematic Studio Brass and Strings, for people who don't know, it's kind of nice libraries, but they have a bit of a small room, so you can use it to just enhance the size of the room and make the room feel bigger than it actually is. Yeah, that's what it does.
So it's essentially, correct me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
essentially kind of doubling the reverb.
It's a pre-reverb stage. You would put this as an insert on your strings bus before a whole reverb, and would sort of simulate a further away sounding mic position in a way by adding these little delays and these little early reflections.
Okay.
It's a bit like as if you moved the deca tree a bit more far away in the room, as if the room was a bit bigger, and then you have to throw the whole thing into a reverb, right? So it's like a mid stage, like you would put this as an insert on the strings bus, for example. That's what I would recommend.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay. So I did a session with an orchestra, oh, blimey, 15 years ago. And the engineer, this was in London, the engineer was asked by the client, they said, why does the strings not sound big enough? And he said, just give me a second. And he did some stuff on the desk and pushed up a fader, and everyone went, wow. And they
He
were like,
probably raised the outrigs.
yeah, all he did was he doubled the signal of the reverb from, I can't remember, this is the Decatur or the outriggers,
Oh,
but
really?
so
Mm.
he basically just left, right panned the reverb.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, it was. He didn't tell them at the time. He was just like, trade secret. And then when they went, he was like, let me show you what I did. uh,
That's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it's that type of thing where my natural approach as the client's natural approach would be, let's buy more string players. Let's buy a bigger room where we
Okay,
should.
yeah, buying a bigger room is usually the best way, but it's a bit expensive.
Yes, yeah, that's it. But now there's room widener,
Oh yeah, well,
which
it's not Abbey Road. You don't get your hopes like too much because it's not gonna replace Abbey Road, but it can make your room like 20% bigger. And
awesome. And P.S. I love how minimal it is. I'm just looking
yeah,
at
it's pretty
the
simple.
yeah. But the thing is, I really love plugins like that. I always, whenever you load up a plugin that's just got like hundreds of
Yeah,
controls,
no,
I go,
yeah,
oh come on, I don't have to. Ain't nobody got time for this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the next plugin is going to be a bit more complex, but still straightforward.
Okay.
It's
What?
gonna be I'm just gonna leak what it is because it's not really a leak because I've told people before, but it's like a panel, but a panel that pans more intelligently. So in a way, you're able to pan the highs before the lows in various ways. So there is a bunch of different panning algorithms which work for stereo sources. So you can pretty much pan a library without panning the room. So if you want to, for example, to pan like Berlin strings and you have the violins, you want to pan them more left, but you don't want to pan all the room ambience because it would sound weird and sort of narrow the room, the natural room ambience, right? Then you can kind of move just the violins, but not the room. So that's what it's doing.
Okay. Wait a second. How is it doing that? Because
Okay. So
surely it would move the same frequencies within the room
yeah, but the thing
over.
is, the reverb is typically more out of phase compared to the direct sound. So if you split a panel in mid side, and then basically it's applying like tonal panning to just the mid signal. That's kind of the smart pan knob. It's just going to take the mid signal and leave the sides which contain most of the reverb, and it's going to apply tonal panning to just the mid. So then you kind of decompose the mid signal, which is the mono part of the signal. You decompose this in dual mono, and you sort of brighten one of the sides. off only the mid signal, and you darken the other side. So it applies like tonal. So basically, you pan the highs first to the left and on the left side. So wait, let me explain this. So say you first of all you split in mid and side. So side is mostly reverb, right? And in the mid signal, you put this in dual mono. So you have a mono left, mono right in terms of physical channels, right? And you brighten the left ear and you darken the right ear on only the mono signal. So you end up
playing the sides.
not panning the base of the mono signal, not panning the base of the sides because it's just staying there, but you pan using the mids and the highs of just the mono signal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect
So you
sense.
end up shifting the instrument in the stage without really affecting the room. I tried different things, but this worked best for me. And so then it's all about tweaking the curves to make sure it's natural and doesn't feel like like you're brightening the sound, and volume compensation and the relationships between the mids and the sides as you pan, because if you don't compensate the level, then it becomes too wide. So there is a bunch of parameters, but basically, if you sort of get all these parameters right, it can sound very natural. And that's what I was trying to do here.
That sounds awesome. In quite a lot of my courses, and I get a lot of flack for this, I narrow the signal and pan the strings in their positions.
Oh, you narrow the signal?
And then send it into its own room.
So that's interesting because, yeah, you're trying to refocus the instrument, but then you have to send it into a room again. Otherwise, you would just get a narrow sound, right?
Yeah.
So this kind of allows you to get more directionality, but not narrow the signal. So it allows you to kind of keep the natural room, which in my opinion is usually better if you can keep the natural room. But usually the only way to do that is just to physically move the players,
Yes.
in the room. So you would end up with a more pan signal naturally. But the issue is many libraries don't have enough spread, and sometimes it's because of physical limitations or just the way it's recorded. So you end up with strings which are kind of centered and you want to spread them, but then you spread the room as you pan. So it's like, how do I not pan the room but just pan the players? And that's always the tricky aspect. So for that, you really have to use some kind of tonal panning. You can't just use like balance panning, because just changing the levels of the channels is going to pan the bass as well. But in real life, the bass is less directional. It's more of an omnipresent sort of rumble that is less directional because the waves kind of stay around for longer. So if you were to shift a player in a real room, you wouldn't really pan the bass. So that's why you kind of want to pan the highs and the mids first. And that's why tonal panning makes more sense compared to straight up like balance panning, if that makes sense. So lots of little things, related to physics that you need to keep in mind. And yeah, there's some really interesting stuff you can do with.
So I'd like your explanation of bass frequencies. I don't know if you've ever done this. We did this at uni. We loaded up a bass on a big sub in a room. We cranked it up super loud and we walked around the room. Because I'd heard the term bass trap before, but I'd never actually experienced it. So you walk around the room and it'd be like, and then you'd step 1 foot forward and all of a sudden the bass would just disappear.
Right?
All of a sudden you're like, what the,
Yeah, bass is wild.
Yeah.
Sometimes you would have like double basses on the right, but you actually have more low end on the left, just because of the layout of the room and how these waves cancel. Like you end up, if you put the max at a certain spot, you would end up with more low end on the opposite side, which makes no sense, right? But
yeah,
just bass is wild, so you can't really control bass. It's just there in the room, you can't. It doesn't make sense to just have it isolated in one ear. So it can't be like that in real life. Like it's so hard to control to begin with. Like we need to put bass traps in every corner. It's a mess.
Yeah, that's it. So you kind of need to imagine it as like a big cone. The lowest frequencies are kind of like slap bang in the middle, perhaps even a mono signal. And then as the frequencies get higher and higher, you can allow yourself more and more room for panning.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, I would say it's not like a mono signal because bass is stereo in real life. It's very stereo, but if it's too stereo, then you get cancellation, and that's bad as well. So you don't want it too wide. You can have it a bit wide, but not too wide,
Yeah.
But then it's understanding that as the frequencies go higher, they become more directional, and like the sound becomes more direct, and you get less audible phasing, So yeah, that's really how it is. The higher frequencies are just less prone to resonating in a room, so you get more direct sound out of the highs. And as you go lower, they tend to kind of live longer, so they have more chance to resonate in the room and come back as reverb in a way. That's why like whole reverbs are not super bright, just because the highs don't have the chance to kind of bounce and come back. So the very highest highs, they just kind of die off. And the only very highs you get, like the highest highs, it's only direct sound from the instruments, like 20K, you know. So that's just how physics work, and it's pretty interesting. I love this stuff.
Me too. I mean, because I try and explain this when I'm talking about using sub hits in
Yeah,
trailer music. Like we're using them for a specific reason. We're using them to imply distance
yeah,
because of the physics of the way the sound works. The bass frequencies travel further.
exactly.
So by just hearing this huge sub sound, we're telling the listener that there's been something massive very
Yeah,
far in the distance, right?
and the fact that the tail is long as well, like it really
Yes.
kind of, it's like natural behavior of sub. So you're like, wow, that's a giant sound, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. A giant has landed 2 miles
Exactly.
from here. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this is awesome. This is awesome. Now what I want to do is that now we're going to move slightly away from nerding out into plugins and physics. We're going
Sure.
to move slightly more into the actually how can we as composers be better at mixing, especially mixing orchestral music and trailer music. So let's start with this, a really easy one for you. What are the most common mistakes you experience when you are mixing a client's orchestral track?
So when I hear a mix from them, or like mistakes in the orchestration and the composition, or mistakes in their mix, which one would
Spoken
you
like a
say?
true professional.
I need to know. It's different, you know.
Okay, let's approach arrangements first.
Okay. I think in many situations it's just that they didn't study orchestration, so they don't know how to write for orchestra. So they end up with missing instruments. That's a pretty common one. For example, they will forget about tubas, or they will just voice the trombones weirdly, or they will have too much instruments in unison. So you end up with everything on the lead, for example, just like one horn line, one bass line, and then you're kind of missing the middle harmony, right? Maybe they forgot to do the trombone chords, or they forgot the fifth and the thirds. So you end up with a texture that's not very fulfilling, doesn't really feel satisfying, because you just have too many voices on the same notes, and you end up with a texture that becomes thin, and you end up with build-ups at certain frequency ranges just because of the fact that they didn't spread the instruments properly. So orchestration mistakes. And sometimes it's just composition as well, straight up, the voice leading is not good. It's just not an interesting melody and stuff like that, or that doesn't work. But when it comes to like trailer music, I think it's a bit more related to production itself, like the way you stack instruments to create that powerful texture. Like mixing can't really save a track that's not orchestrated properly. And just aside from like orchestra aside, the synth as well, the way you kind of stack synths, the way you kind of stack everything really, or drums, not using the right libraries, missing a big layer, layering drums, that's also a big one. Like just relying, for example, on a mid drum layer that's fairly, just has a rumbly sub, but doesn't have the punch in the sub. Or like the hits. Another big one is the hits. For example, just using a kind of a noisy, a wimpy hit that's very like, a bit like a cymbal crash, but not having like the thumpy aspect. Or for example, they want to use a big trailer hit, but the low end of that trailer hit is like a low boom. So you end up with like a very kind of slappy high end, but it doesn't really translate in the lows, because the lows are pretty flat dynamically. So you have a very kind of clicky high end that's good for a trailer hit, I guess. But then in the lows, you don't have that punch. You don't have this short kind of thumpy punch. And I think like for an ideal trailer hit, you need to have everything. You need to have some kind of punch in the lows, and also tail in the lows. You need to have some kind of click in the highs, and also some kind of tail. You kind of need everything at once, to have the most powerful hit of all time. But if you miss one aspect, it can just be perceived differently and just be kind of lame sounding. So yeah, knowing about layering, stacking layers, and orchestration, that's the three main things. So usually composers who have a bit more of classical background, or a bit more of a, academical background, I would say, they tend to orchestrate stuff better, but they're actually too conservative. They're afraid of stacking as many instruments. They're like, oh, I already have so many trombone voices. But so usually you want the middle ground. You want someone who's not afraid to just go unrealistic, but you want someone who has the knowledge to know how to spread instruments in order to maximize the bigness of the texture. And then you have the ideal trailer track. So of course it's not so easy. It takes years to learn all this stuff. But that's really the main mistakes I encounter, I would say.
Okay, there are so many questions I want to ask you right now.
Sure, go ahead.
So many questions. I'm going to dive straight in for the trailer hits, though.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say I'm a novice composer or aspiring trailer music composer, and I've just bought, say, a Keep Forest plugin, and they've got some wonderful sounding trailer hits. And let's say it's a fully expansive. This is the whole kit and caboodle. This is my Act 3 trailer, drag and drop sample. I drop it in. It seems like it's got everything. But let's say to your ears, the trained pro, the sub and the low kicky end are a bit flabby. What would you do?
Okay. If it's close enough, I wouldn't try to layer more stuff because it can be tricky to just get two sub layers to work together. Sometimes it works, but sometimes you end up with phasing and it just becomes flabbier. So if it's really kind of close and it's just missing a little bit, then I would just shape it with various tools. So first I would try EQ. For example, if it's just a little bit too cymbal like a piano, it just lacks this oomph. Sometimes it just means you need to boost the sub because in context, a hit will sound different from in solo. So you could listen to a hit sample and it sounds great in solo, right? And then once you layer it with the masking of the other instruments, it will be perceived differently. So try to turn it up and EQ it a little bit, boost what you don't hear in context and see how it comes out of the mix. If it's still not quite right, then you can use other tools like transient enhancers. I like the Boss Digital Labs Transgressor in particular because it's a multi-band transient enhancer. So if you have a trailer hit that's almost perfect, but it's still a bit flabby, you can just kind of create a kick within the hit. So you can use the highs as a detection for a low expansion. So say, for example, you have a click of that kick, you're going to use this as an internal sidechain trigger, which means that the transient designer will listen to this high end in order to trigger its expansion, so its process. And the process itself is going to be like low kind of expansion, like 150 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, like between 50 and 100. So you sort of recreate a bit of a kick, a tighter kick in the sub based on the highs. So you get an accurate, predictable sort of trigger with the highs, and you kind of trigger that low expansion. So that's a way to kind of add more punch to a hit that's almost perfect, but too flabby, too flat. And now, if the sample is way off and it's just kind of missing that range to begin with, there is nothing to boost there, then you need another sample to really make it work. But if it's close, I generally would just try to fiddle with it like that.
Okay. My question to you is, you mentioned the transient enhancers.
Yeah.
Would a multi-brand compressor do the same thing?
Depending on the multi-band compressor, yeah. You need one that's able to do expansion and that's able to do sidechain as well. So actually many do that. And then typically, yeah, I mean, technically it could be the same thing because a transient designer is a sort of compressor anyway. In a way, it's a compressor. They use different ways to detect the signal. Like I know, for example, that the newfangled audio punctuate is a pretty different process because it bases detection not just on threshold, but on like various parameters. It's a bit smarter. But you could achieve that, I think, with ProMB. Actually, I did this with ProMB many times. Which is a multi-band compressor. So yes, you can depending on the plugin. All you want is like low expansion, right? That's a way to add punch. But yeah, I would say don't jump to plugins if the sample is really not good enough. You need to really be sure that, okay, this is going to work. I have the content there in the base. It's just not quite fat enough, but it's there.
This, guys in the audience and girls in the audience, this is absolute gold dust. I hope you completely appreciate what Joel is giving away for free here. This is this is one-to-one lesson right here.
I hope it's useful.
But this is so useful because you don't get taught this stuff unless you, of course, buy your course.
Oh, you can just, I mean, I reveal some of this stuff in my YouTube videos. It's not like mega secrets.
No, but it's not. But you have to look for it, and you have to know it to look for it.
Yeah.
You have to be told your hit's flabby, for you then to go, well, how do I fix my flabby hit?
Yeah, exactly. I don't really believe in hiding things because that's what you just said. You can know the techniques. You need to know what to correct first. So you're never gonna replace a mixing engineer because he knows what to listen for. He knows what to tell you. Okay, your hit here is flabby, because you might not even realize it's flabby, and that just takes years. So you can have all the knowledge and all the courses in the world. if you don't take the time to really study and practice this stuff and just train your ears for a while, you won't be able to recognize these things, and you might have all the theory knowledge in the world, you won't be able to get good mixes. So I would say courses can really help you get there quicker, because you can learn the theory and the relevant content faster. You don't have to do YouTubing as much left and right. That's the value. But then you have to put in the work and spend the time. Otherwise, it's just pointless. So it's like the two things need to be combined to really kind of maximize your progress.
Okay, so I got one last question about, I'm going to jump in because I know one of the most common issues the training composers have, and I
Yeah.
think I know what you're going to say to this, because I think you've kind of given it away. But a lot of people would say to me, how do I fix my muddy mix?
Okay.
I know there's a ton of answers to that.
Okay. How do you fix your muddy mix? Okay, so you need to kind of you need to think about this in order, with steps. Okay, so why is your mix muddy? And so go back to the beginning. Is it the orchestration? So did you stack too many pointless layers? Do you have a massive wall of drums that's just masking everything? So first of all, orchestration, and figure out if there is useless stuff or if everything is fine. And of course, it takes a while to really recognize that, but that's the first step. Then it's about balance. Okay, so are my voices balanced properly? So even if you have a perfect orchestration, if your wall of drums is just way too loud and covering all the harmony, the track is going to feel very inharmonic and very noisy, because you have all this noisy content of the drums masking all the harmony. So you're gonna feel like it just doesn't sound as glorious. So if your brass is properly orchestrated, but you have a wall of drums masking it, it's kind of pointless, right? So balance is a massive, important step. So once you sorted out balance, then you can go more in detail. Okay, so everything is good, the balance is good, the orchestration is good, but my mix is still muddy. So then it's probably EQ and tonal balance. So after balance, you have what I call tonal balance. And that's really the more EQ aspect, of the mixing process. Maybe my wall of drums is great and appropriate, but it's just the sample is so rumbly at 200 or 300 hertz that you have a massive buildup in this range and it's masking everything. So then maybe you cut 6 dB in the mids in the drums, and suddenly the harmony becomes clearer, because that mid range is now way more dominated by actual chords and notes and not just like rumbly content. So suddenly it transforms the whole mix, right? But you can't just jump to this step before considering the previous ones. You have to kind of think about this in order. And of course, with experience, you don't have to be so methodical, because you will just know and not make mistakes. But I think it's important, especially at the beginning, to kind of ask yourself these questions in order. And if you did tonal balance, like if you did composition balance and tonal balance properly, you already have 80% of your mix, and the rest is just reverb to make your library sound a bit bigger, and compression to shape the things a bit differently, and then saturation is what it's like the last 3% that can be a negative 3% if you do it badly. So it's not that important. So you really have to focus on tonal balance. It's super important, and balance. That really the main ways to fix your MIDI mix. But now I guess I didn't really answer, because there is not one way to fix your MIDI mix. It's 3 ways. So you need to know where to cut as well, where to cut to achieve that good tonal balance and not have a MIDI mix. Okay, so how do you know where to cut? You see how other people do it, other people who make mixes you like, you see how they do it. You analyze some of the mixes. It could be like OSTs from movies like How to Train Your Dragon, great mix. How to Train Your Dragon 2, great mixes by Sean Murphy. So just analyze things you like, figure out, okay, how do these strings sound? How is the EQ of these strings compared to my track? Where do I need to cut my strings to get a tone more like this? And then you will start to realize things. And after a while, you will be able to take your own decisions for your tracks and get good results. So it's a lot of practice and analyzing and training your ear for a while. Yeah.
It's the same advice for getting better at writing.
Really? Yeah, I
Yeah.
guess that's true,
Well,
actually.
practice listening, practicing, comparing, and just, especially when you're talking about the balance, you're thinking about the balance of your parts.
Yeah.
I try and simplify everything to 4 parts if I can when I'm teaching stuff, drums included. You think about the drums in essentially 4 groups, so that they're not going to cover each other, and you will then write a balanced part. But yeah, no, it's great. And so ends the masterclass. I do want to touch on this now, as you've basically been teaching us for the last sort of 20 minutes. Let's talk about your course. What's the course called? Where can people get hold of it?
Yeah. So the course is called Mixing Cinematic Music. It's on Master the Score, so MCM. And it's a platform that has a bunch of courses about orchestral music. So we have a mixing course, my course, and there's plenty of other courses about, composition and stuff like that. But in this course, I try to really give people the tools to really be able to make any kind of orchestral mix. So I touch on trailer music, but also more like scoring stuff, even live orchestra. So it's really kind of a big all-in-one package to learn how to tackle any kind of orchestral mixing. So the way I split it is in sections. So first I have a section which is more of an introductory theoretical section. So you're gonna have a bunch of videos, I think around 20 to 30, something like that, which are exploring different aspects of mixing. So some of the stuff I talked about, which is balance, tonal balance, compression, mastering, all these little topics. So this is really kind of to give you the theory knowledge in order to be able to tackle real life situations in a way. Then there are other sections. There is an how to EQ section, which also helps with tonal balance. So tonal balance is so important that I decided to create an extra section called how to EQ, which is a bit of per instrument encyclopedia of how I would approach certain EQs. For example, violins, with common spots where these instruments could be EQ'd. So now, of course, it's not always the same curve for every library, but you have some common sort of pain points per instrument. So I like to elaborate on that because I think this is the kind of thing that people at first will try to emulate without really hearing the problem. But after a while, they will, it will help because they will kind of remember these spots and then they will pay attention to these spots when mixing their own instruments and they will be able to EQ better. So yeah, that's this section. But after all of this, I would say the most important section is the mix deconstruction section. It really kind of puts everything in context because you have real mixes, which I explore. I go into every track of the session and I show every process. So you can see every plugin that I put and why I take these decisions. And of course, I explain what I do and why. And if you watch these mix deconstructions with the background of the introductory videos, I think you will really understand why I'm doing these things. And yeah, then you kind of get more familiar with all of this stuff. So I have 20 hours of content, I would say. I think it's 17 or around 17, 18 now, because I'm going to have a trailer music update really soon. Actually, at the time this podcast is out, I think the trailer update is out. Yeah, just to explore everything and give people a good overall knowledge about orchestral mixing. Yeah. Oops.
There we go. What can us trailer music composers look forward to with regard to the trailer music update in the course?
Sure. Basically, it's a few videos about trailer music specific topics. So there is a big video about mixing hits.
Yes.
So touching on the transient stuff, everything we talked about, stacking hits, all that stuff. So I have a video on hits, pulses, pads. What else? I need to look, but there is like there are going to be like 6 or 7 extra videos. The original course was already covering trailer music in a way and sound design, but this is really more focused on, okay, if you're trying to make a big trailer track, how would you approach mixing some of these elements to maximize the bigness? That's sort of the idea of this update.
Dude, this is awesome and very exciting for my audience, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah, awesome.
So I think, I don't want to take any more of your time. You're an absolute superstar. I would like to end with a quick fire round. Okay.
So what?
A quick fire round. So question, answer,
Yeah.
nice
Okay,
and quick. Okay.
let's do
You got
this.
it.
That's
Okay,
fun.
right. Okay. I'll shift it a little bit as you are, predominantly a mixing engineer. So we're going to go plug-in heavy. Normally plugins is just one of the questions, but we're going to go plug-in heavy here. And I know you're going to say, well, it depends on the situation, but you're going to have to give me an
You
answer.
don't need tons of plugins, by the way.
Well, I know, but let's
Yeah.
start with the first question. Your go-to multiband EQ.
Pro Q3.
Pro Q3.
Yeah, by far.
Nice. See, I still don't have that. That has come up in almost every quickfire round. Why don't I have that? I'm going to get that. I'm going to have to send an email. Okay, go to convolution reverb.
I don't use convolution reverb at all. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Well, in that case, go to algorithmic reverb.
Okay, cinematic rooms.
Nice. Go to compressor.
Oh, okay. This is sorry. It's not. I can't just say one thing because okay, if you had to just get one, get track comp, DMG audio track comp because it has every type of compressor in it. Yeah.
What was that?
DMG audio track comp
BMD
because it has
audio.
every model of compressor in it. But I already have too many compressors, so yeah.
So you're just basically saying a massive collection of compressors. Is that your answer?
Exactly. Spend 5K in compressor. No, I'm just kidding. Don't.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, okay. Let's take it down a notch. So let's just say, let's go. We mentioned multi-band compressors for trailer hits, and I've seen plenty of other trailer music composers and beat makers use multi-band compressors brilliantly for drums. So what would be if someone said to you, you can only choose one multi-band compressor, Joel?
Pro
You
MB.
can't. Pro MB.
Yeah.
Okay, good. We got that one. Oh, this is good. Okay, and last one, saturation. Could be distortion, or tape emulation. That whole room of warmth.
It has to be decapitator still. Just because you have several styles, it's the best value.
I love
good.
Decapitator.
Yeah, it just sounds good.
Okay, and
yeah.
last one. This is actually the last one. This is a setup, though. This is a setup. Okay, what about best room widener?
Oh, Room Widener by JD Factory.
Boom!
Easy one.
Awesome. Yeah, easy one. Joel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
I've got a load of info myself out of this, and I know my audience is going to absolutely love it.
Awesome.
You've been an absolute legend. Thanks, dude.
Thanks for having me.